Hi, today I am going to be examining a network of abusive Twitter users. I'm calling this a storm of trolls, although not every account here could be characterized as a troll account. I want to warn from the beginning that there may be offensive content throughout. We'll be looking at some live Twitter feeds that are unpredictable, but I will try to keep this to a minimum and probably restart if I come up with anything terribly offensive. Throughout the presentation, I'd like to keep in mind this quote from Kurt Vonnegut. We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be. A lot of the accounts that we'll be looking at tend to drape themselves in irony. They tend to use racist, sexist, homophobic imagery in a comic way or through memes. And it's a defense where they can argue in favor of free speech and suggest that they don't really mean it. They're not being truly racist. They are just playing with the imagery. But I would submit that what you pretend to be does reflect what you really are. As background, I need to note that I did not acquire this network myself. Professor Goldbeck provided the list of Twitter handles and the connections among them. This list ultimately came from a service called Blockbot. And Blockbot was formed in 2015 in response to Twitter harassment against feminist and social justice groups. If we look at the websites of Blockbot, you might get a little sense of it. Basically, what you do is sign up and link it to your Twitter account, and you can block different levels of offensive accounts. This actual Blockbot site doesn't seem to work particularly well or at all right now, but they do have an active Twitter account themselves, somewhat active, and an active GitLab where there's a new version of the software in progress. So you can connect this with your own Twitter account if you want to block a lot of trolls all at once or submit troll accounts to their lists. I want to talk quickly about the background of some of this content. You may be familiar with Gamergate, which was a controversy that erupted in 2014, connected to many internet subcultures, including Chan sites and Reddit. If you don't know about Gamergate, I envy you. It's not very fun to study, but it is important to be aware of. And I don't want to get into the details, but it's connected to a broader reaction against perceived political correctness and multiculturalism among internet users. A lot of this content is also connected to the movement referred to as the alt-right, which I'm calling here a web-savvy, arch-conservative libertarian movement steeped in irony. There is not a lot of academic literature on the alt-right, but there are a lot of news articles and other content, and it's in the news quite a lot at the moment. There are a lot of connections between the alt-right and the Donald Trump presidential campaign. This BuzzFeed article that I'm listing here gives a good background primer on the alt-right. I found throughout doing this research that there are a lot of conservative Gamergate alt-right memes that I was not familiar with, and now I kind of wish I had never learned about. But there's a lot of sources of information about these if you try to look at these accounts and want to know exactly why these people are so obsessed with Sweden or with this annoying frog cartoon. The site knowyourmeme.com has a lot of that content available and explains exactly why these are right-wing memes in the first place. I want to move over and look at the actual graph in Gephi now. And what you'll see here is a basic network that has some interesting features. Perhaps most surprisingly is how well connected everything is, though you can see that there are a lot of different clusters that we can examine in isolation from each other. What we're looking at here is a force atlas layout in which the nodes are colored based on modularity class and sized according to betweenness centrality. I found this to be a useful view overall. And if I zoom in here, you'll see that I've labeled all of these nodes with the number of their modularity class. I've also taken advantage of a plugin in Gephi, which is called Link Modulator, and that may actually be incorrect, but what you can do with this plugin is right-click on a node, open in web browser one of the columns that's attached to the data laboratory. And when I open up a URL like this, we end up looking at a Twitter account that's live right now, and obviously they're talking about Donald Trump and quoting Scott Adams. And what I did for my research was attempt to do a quick look at every 10th node in the network. And I did this by writing a little programming script that, if I pull it up, it works like this. It will go through the list and launch different Twitter accounts in my browser immediately so that I can say, hey, this is a Gamergator, and type it in here, etc., to create a list that turns into a spreadsheet in the end. This is, again, some Trump type content. I took those keywords and they ended up a column in a spreadsheet ultimately. And here I have the full network in an Excel spreadsheet, filtered just to show the ones where I have included the keywords. And you'll see that I've colored these according to the same modularity classes that we have in the graph. If I unfilter it, you'll see the entire list of Twitter users like this. So I found this an interesting way and helpful way to identify exactly who these users were. And it turns out that I could group these into a number of clusters. The most important ones and the biggest ones are here. This kind of pink number 1 group are Gamergate related people. Over here at number 5, which is in this corner, we have some English soccer fans. And these people tend to shade over into anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim sentiment as well. We have this little green group here of 7 who are probably the worst of the lot. This includes a lot of anti-Semitic, Nazi imagery, UK Independence Party, European white power type things. And I don't really recommend you look at any of these accounts on Twitter, certainly not at work. Here we have an interesting little group, number 8, which seems to be more like left-wing Gamergators or people who were making fun of and mocking the main Gamergate cluster. Down here, number 10, this is kind of a Christian Catholic conservative group. It again also includes a lot of anti-Muslim, anti-racist imagery as well. We have a small group somewhere here, number 23, which is a bunch of hackers and people who use Encyclopedia Dramatica, which is a complicated kind of website of hackery stuff. They don't seem to be ideological or racist in the same way as some of the other groups. We have 26 kind of scattered over here at the end. And this is a kind of transphobic group and includes some people who are queer women who are opposed to trans women invading their space, which is an interesting topic. It's a little difficult to tell how real it is, but I do think that this is probably a legit group of women who do have a grievance. There are a couple other random tiny nodes that are hard to understand, except that they are tiny clusters that seem to include a lot of shouting and just weird behavior. What I really want to take a look at are a couple of these clusters, including number 5 here, these soccer fans. There's a long history of, there's a long history of racist connections to European soccer fandom. And there's actually a vast literature written about this, which is pretty interesting because there may not be as much content about trolls themselves. So it's an interesting source of ethnographic studies and similar things. The soccer fans here, I was curious about how they connect with these other groups, the racists and Gamergators, because they're not necessarily gamers themselves. So what I did was filter out most of the clusters by modularity class, take a look and see who's connecting these number 5s to the number 10s and the number 1s. And it turns out that they are, that there's a connection between the gamers and the soccer fans in the end, but not a strong one. They seem to be pretty discrete groups. And then I also want to take a quick look at number 14, which is a pretty interesting cluster, if I can even find it here. And when I find it, this is a group of fake accounts that I want to talk about just for 1 minute as an example of what I'm finding as I look at do research on this. Here we have 14. So if we look at one of these 14 accounts and open it in a web browser, come on. you'll see that what we have here are fake accounts that purported to be feminists or otherwise typical women who were involved in social justice issues. Most of these accounts are outdated. They retweet Hillary Clinton and things like this. These groups were exposed in some articles, including this one from BuzzFeed, as something called Operation Lollipop, where a bunch of Gamergaters created these fake accounts to spread propaganda or otherwise confuse people, or just for kicks. They pretended to be lesbians or people of different ethnicities or trans activists, and then came up with ridiculous or absurd propaganda campaigns. They did a whole thing where they tried to stop people from celebrating Father's Day as a patriarchal, rape society induced holiday. But they eventually were all exposed. So those were the most interesting findings that I had, but I want to add a couple of personal comments as well before I wrap up here, which is that the project overall was surprisingly boring. I don't want to minimize the real harm that comes from Twitter harassment or general internet harassment. You can read about it almost every day in the news, and I deeply sympathize with the victims of these campaigns, including Gamergate. However, when you look at their Twitter feeds, you tend to find that these are pretty boring individuals who are committing these crimes. Once you get past the racist imagery and the other offensive things that these people do, they tend to not be interesting, at least as they present themselves on social media. And I found myself feeling sorry for them as a group. As they are, in fact, human beings, I think that they are worth sympathizing with, and I only wish that they could sympathize with their own victims as much as I do with them. So that's all. I hope that I haven't warped your brain too much with this terrible imagery. If you want to read more about this, go online and read about Gamergate, and you will be disappointed but well informed. Thanks.